Welcome to Fynders Keepers, the vodcast powered by Asset Find. Here, we talk with the people shaping the future of global financial asset recovery, from industry veterans to technology innovators. Each episode uncovers new insights, real-world challenges, and the emerging tools helping companies locate and recover billions in unclaimed financial assets worldwide. If it touches finance, data, or discovery, we're talking about it here. This is Fynders Keepers, where every conversation uncovers something worth finding. All right, well, welcome everyone to today's episode of Fynders Keepers, and it is entitled Found Money, Real Stories. Today I'm joined by Ricky Maldonado, who is the CEO and co-founder of reclaimed.org, which is a nationwide service that helps everyday Americans find and recover unclaimed money held by state agencies. He's guided thousands of claimants through a process most people never even knew existed, turning government-held dormant assets into real money back into real hands. Welcome, Ricky.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I first want to sort of start out with how you ended up here. So reclaim.org is a very specific problem to dedicate your career to. What's your personal origin story? Was there that aha moment, a case, a person that made you say, this is really what I need to be doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. We had a friend who was doing this work kind of at a lower level, and he was trying to figure out how to teach retired folks to make money on the side by helping other folks, reclaim money. And then, we took a look at that, and we realized that it was a very outdated but important space. Where there seems to be, a lack of technology and a lot of bureaucracy that make things slower. And our background is very tech heavy. So me and my co-founders and I, we all met in Silicon Valley, and what we like to do is make things more efficient, quicker, and more easy for people. So that's how we got in.
Right. It seems to make sense. And when there's this problem that can be solved with tech, it's always exciting. So let's switch to the human side. So you've helped people recover everything from a few $100s to literally life-changing sums, like the teacher who reclaimed $225,000. So are you comfortable sharing some of those personal stories that really stuck with you over the years?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was really big one for me personally, because this was somebody in LA who had actually tried claiming this money years ago directly with the government. He spent about 2 years of back and forth and not able to prove that this was his money. It was actually his adopted parents who had passed away sadly, and left him a large amount of money, in their name, but it was due to him, and the state would not approve it. He tried working with them, and it just didn't work out. So finally, we got a hold of him, and he was kind of like, "Hey, look, I know it's real, right? Because most people don't think it's real when we reach out. They're like, this is a scam, whatever." He's like, "I know it's real. I've tried getting it. I don't think you can get it, but good luck. Like, more power to you if you can." So we signed him up. We handled his claim, and it took us a good year and a half, but we were able to get that through. We got him paid $225,000. This was a teacher in California, so it was one of those especially impactful cases where this was a person who could really use the money. He had tried getting the money. The state made it impossible, and we were able to get that through. And now he's very happy, to say the least.
Such a win-win, human fulfilling story. And it's really almost like, winning the lottery.
Mhm.
With the lottery, we all know pretty much where to buy a lottery ticket. But when it comes to unclaimed property, most people don't know where to look. In fact, the stat is 1 in 7 Americans have unclaimed money that they don't know about, and about 80% have actually never even checked.
Right.
So in your experience, and we see this at Asset Find with companies as well to an extent, what's the biggest reason that you see that people never look? Is it disbelief, distrust, pure unawareness? What are you seeing?
It's a mixture of both. I would say largely people are never contacted appropriately. So the state has limited resources to reach out to folks to find them. Typically, by the time that they send a notice out saying, "Hey, this money's with the state," they've already moved addresses maybe twice, and they just millions of people across the state or across the country. They can't track everybody down. I would say that's a big one, is just lack of notice and awareness. And then I would say second is disbelief. There's a lot of people, and I don't blame them, who when we first reach out, they're like, yeah, right. Um, and I have so many stories, but there was one lady who was behind on her bills. She reached out to us and she said, "Hey, I've been getting a bunch of letters. I thought it was a scam at first, and you guys look legit." She was very, very skeptical, but she ended up trusting us, and we showed her, "Hey, we're licensed. This is our website, etc." And a few months later, we got her paid, and she was in utter disbelief. She called us crying on the phone and was like, "Thank you so much. You guys are angels." Like I was honestly still thinking it was kind of a scam, but I was in such a vulnerable spot where I was willing to risk that if it meant getting a significant amount of money potentially, right? So that's another one, is like people, given all the scams out there, they're skeptical because you're having somebody tell you, "Hey, I'd like to help you get money back." The first reaction is typically like, "Yeah, nice try, bud." So.
So let's touch on the scams a little bit because, it is so true. We are living in this world now where we are needing to be absolutely hyper vigilant. And we're almost, in some respects, overcorrecting for that. And so, talk a little bit about you showing that you're a real business, you're licensed. What are some of the other ways that you're able to overcome that perception and that fear that this has got to be too good to be true?
Mhm. Yeah, well, I think a big one is that we don't ask for any, sensitive info or credit card number or bank account. I always tell folks, like, if you're on the phone with somebody and they're asking you for, your credit card number or your bank account or whatever, that's a huge red flag. You should probably not proceed with that person. You should probably do your research, see what's going on. We don't ask for that. We're licensed directly by state governments, and ultimately, I think we come across as informational because, like I said, most people don't, they're not even aware that the money is out there or why the money's out there. So we like to provide information, be like, "Hey, this is to let you know that this account is out there. It was because of this from this year, whatever. This is why this happened." So really guiding them through this kind of new thing, right? Because as you said, one in seven Americans or so have unclaimed money, but most people don't encounter that very often, right? So it's our
Right.
job to kind of educate and provide legitimacy in that regard, and ultimately, it's their choice if they want to, pursue it or not.
It's funny because I think in some respects, at least on the corporate side, we work with partners, but there are times when we're reaching out directly and there's that reticence as well because I think that maybe in some respects on the corporate side, the suspicion level can be even greater and even higher.
Mhm.
Those are, interesting tactics, to take on, to approach in the way that you do. Now, when we talk about actually wanting to get it to the finish line in the process, so, we know that state portals and claim processes can be, notoriously complicated. What is it that reclaim.org, does to actually get people across the finish line? And where do most people actually fall short or fail without your help?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that depending on the claim, there are some cases where it might require probate or other legal processes that people think that that's kind of a walk in the park, and then they deal with it and they're like, "Oh wow, I had to hire an attorney, or I had to fill all this paperwork and deal with months if not years of communication back and forth with not only the state that holds the money, but perhaps the holder, right? So like holder being like the bank or the insurance company that owed them that money originally, right? And so they get caught in this kind of triangle of dealing with the state, and which they're very slow, they're very non-responsive, and then having to deal with the private entity that lost the money to the state and trying to gather proof of their account, right? But they've probably moved address since then, so they can't provide proof, and it's just like it's a whole mess that they run into. And so what we do is we simplify that process. We have special licensing that allows us to get the documentation that we need for people without much, if any, input on their side. For folks who have deceased claims, meaning like a family member passed away and left money, and they're entitled to it, right? We have a team of lawyers that handle that. We upfront the money as well for probate, so that people don't have to take it out of pocket. And yeah, I mean, if I had to simplify it, it's really about making it as painless as possible, as quick as possible, right? Because ultimately, we want folks to get their money fast, secure, and easily.
Right. And everybody wins when that process is, seamless. And you try to get there in the ways that you do through technology and through those the systems that you've developed. So this is an industry that continues to grow, and so globally the numbers are about 200 billion US. 70 billion is sitting in unclaimed assets, state agencies right now, which is at a record high. And, companies like Asset Find, we're seeing the same growth globally. So this growth, in your view, is it growing because more assets are being escheated, or is it just because recovery is just not keeping up pace?
I think it's a mixture of both, but I would say that from our experience, the bottleneck seems to be in the systems that process these claims, these funds, right? Whether that be on the reporter holder side from banks that have to report unclaimed money to the state, or whether that be in the state itself and how quickly they can process a claim and the staff that they have to do that. I would say it's a combination of both, but mainly the slowness of bureaucracy, the outdated systems that most governments are not quite incentivized to update their systems to make things as fast as possible. Right, they're working on a tight budget, perhaps, or there's simply not enough public pressure to get that done. So you don't innovate, right? I think that's a big thing. And then to make things worse, you have a lot of money that's now being transferred from the previous generation to this one, and so you mix those up, and it's kind of like a huge buildup. So to answer your question, I think it's a two kind of set problem.
Makes sense, and you touched on the generational wealth, intergenerational wealth transfer, which we know is quoted in different articles, trillions of dollars. So that I would imagine, I think we all can see that this number is just going to keep climbing and climbing. And so when we talk about that wealth transfer, that sort of brings me to what happens. Some of the most complex cases are actually they involved deceased owners, estates, probate documents, family members who didn't even know that these assets existed, and you touched on it earlier. What's the most surprising or emotionally charged situation you've navigated through a claim like that?
Oh wow, that's a good one. We've dealt with a lot of folks who there's been problems within their family where money tends to make things messy a lot of the time, and when you have I can't think of a specific case, but we encounter it all the time where folks have several siblings and their parent passes away or somebody in the family passes away, and they're just in like a bigger bickering war between each other for years. It destroys relationships, and there can be a lot of emotions going around
Right.
there, and it makes it kind of hard to deal with that, because you'll reach out to one person, and they'll be like, oh, I want nothing to know about this, blah blah blah. They can. I mean, we've had people tell us they can, die under a bridge, and like,
Right.
so that's always kind of crazy to see, is how emotional people get, and how messy and distraught families get from money. Um,
Right.
yeah,
More money, more problems, right?
exactly.
It's not always this clear cut, but I would imagine again when you're dealing with the human side of things, it's just something that is just part of part of the job, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, back to the challenges around claiming. So, every state has different rules, timelines, documentation requirements, which of course makes your job harder. From the claimant side, how much does that variation actually cost people in time, frustration, and ultimately money that they never actually recover?
You're saying from them trying to recover the money themselves, and deal with that.
Right, right, which is why, people like reclaim.org need to step in and really help with that process.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, so funny enough, a lot of the people that we end up helping, they are people who have either tried in the past to deal
Right.
with this by themselves, and have invested a year, 2 years of back and forth and all that mess, and then finally they're like, okay, let me just give it to this person who knows what they're doing. And then a lot of folks as well who are unaware of it, we make them aware of the money. And then they might kind of ghost us. They might kind of disappear and go, oh, let me, I got this.
Mhm.
And we always know, right? It's usually like, oh, I had a family emergency, or, insert last minute excuse. And what happens is usually, 6 to 12 months down the line, they call us back, and they're like, "Hey, actually, I'm actually ready to move forward with this." Blah blah blah. It's like, okay, great. Happy to help you. So I would say it's just the biggest problem is lost time,
Right,
um, and in some cases, lost money, right? Because if you have to hire somebody to get this through, or if you have to deal with a lawyer, which can be very expensive hourlies, that's a huge problem. But I would say largely it's the time. It's the time. It's the headache. Most people don't have many hours a day to devote to being on hold with a government person or with a bank or whatever, and getting to spin around. That can be extremely frustrating. So yeah, and time is money at the end of the day, right? So that time that you spend dealing with this is time that you could be spending doing anything else.
right. And I think that we see the same thing on the corporate side, sort of on a different scale, but it's sort of even bigger hoops to jump through, and even more complex labyrinth, more regulations, more restrictions, internal company policies, and so we can understand that same sort of reticence or frustration, and then the understanding that wow, this can actually be made easier through technology and through the right partnership. So we see that as well.
And if I
So
could just add on to that, specifically, what takes a lot of folks time and frustration is the supporting evidence to claim, money that's out there, right? So if you have a claim from 1980, right, from your grandfather or whatever, from a company he used to work for, and an address that no longer exists, that can get tricky, especially if the person's deceased, and especially if that company doesn't exist anymore, or they've been acquired by another company, right? So tracking that evidence down, which is required for the state, because the state needs to be 110% sure that they're paying out the money to who it is, right? It
right,
can't just be, oh, your name's John Smith, my name's John Smith, here you go, have $10,000. They have to do
right,
due diligence, and so they have certain requirements that are involved in proving, beyond a doubt, that this in fact is the right person. And
right.
getting those documents, I think, is the hardest part. Getting that proof and dealing with the state and getting that through the finish line. I think that's where we really come in and deliver well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So if we talk a little bit about sort of the compliance side and the recovery side. So, the unclaimed property space has the compliance side where companies are filing assets, and the recovery side where people are claiming them back. Asset Find operates globally in the recovery space. Just from your perspective and what you're seeing, do you think that the two sides of the ecosystem talk to each other enough, or is there a disconnect that really is ultimately costing consumers?
I think there is a disconnect. I think there's not enough conversation because both sides are kind of you know too busy with what they've got going on, the process that they have to deal with. But truly, one side needs the other. So I think if there were more communication between both parties and we were able to get, like I said, smoother systems, more efficient, fast processing on both sides, then you would have holders that report claims more accurately to the state, right? Which then makes the state's job easier. It makes our job easier to then find those folks, right? Because what we see happen a lot is a lot of holders, they'll report a claim in somebody's name. They might, not know the address, so they leave it blank, or they might put in a typo, or it could be a million reasons. At the end of the day, it's a human being inputting the information, right? And however that gets reported to the state is how we receive that data. And usually that data is a mess. We have to make sense of that. So that slows things down because it's like, okay, this they're claiming that this person lives at a commercial building. That's probably not their address, right? So yeah, I would say the more communication, the better, so that we can kind of see, hey, you guys should do this better, so that we can help, find people better and make things easier for everybody around.
Yeah, and again, I think we see similar challenges with our data on the corporate side as well, where there's just the addresses and information come in so many different formats. The information is often mismatched, incorrect.
Mhm.
States, countries, all the codes are all mixed up. So it's really, I think this is really where technology, the right technology comes in, and especially in the day of in our era of AI, leveraging it appropriately to really be able to sift through that complexity and very quickly synthesize and be able to match the records with the appropriate person and or company.
Absolutely, and I'm particularly excited about what kind of innovations will come out of this era, especially in regards to government systems, which I think need the innovation the most. So it's refreshing to see a company like Asset Find, do the best that they can to kind of push that towards the future more. So it's really cool.
Right. I think we're all in partnership. We're all rowing in the same direction. So you know, in a perfect world, if you could change one thing, what single change would have the biggest impact on reuniting people with their money?
If I could change one thing, I would revamp the systems that process unclaimed money with the state, that process those claims, because they're very outdated, they're very slow, and for us, they seem to be, one of the biggest bottlenecks. So I would love to see, different states adapt more tech friendly systems that make things quicker, and easier, and that have better updating systems so that people can keep track of where their claim is in the process. And that'd be one thing. And I'll just add in another. I wish that they were a little better staffed as well, so that we don't overwhelm the people working in these offices with loads of claims that they're struggling to keep up, and there's a backlog, right? Because that delays the payout time, and then we have people calling us like, "Hey, where's my money?" Blah blah blah. It's like it's in process, but the state takes a while to process it. Like I said, sometimes months, sometimes a year plus, depending on the state. So that would be a huge fix.
Well, we can always dare to dream, right?
Exactly.
Well, listen, Ricky, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you today. Thank you for your participation. It's been fantastic, and thank you to everybody for listening. And tune in soon for our next episode. Thanks again, Ricky.
Thank you very much.